Good morning. As governor, I have the responsibility and the authority to ensure that our state remains on a fiscally sustainable path. That is why each year we review the budget carefully, line by line. We look at the assumptions on which the budget is based and the services it supports. And we assess the impact and any unintended consequences of legislation passed by the General Assembly. After the budget is signed, we continue to monitor the numbers throughout the year, and we take whatever action is necessary to keep the budget in balance and maintain healthy reserves. This authority, provided by our Constitution, requires prudent management and careful planning, and it is vital to keeping our fiscal house in order. For example, during the 2010 fiscal year, when the global financial crisis hit the hardest and revenues plummeted, we restricted more than $900 million in spending. These responsible practices are cited routinely by the ratings agencies in reaffirming our top AAA credit rating, and they stand in stark contrast to the dysfunction in Washington and other states. As a result, unlike other states, we weathered the national recession without going into debt or reaching further into the pockets of taxpayers. Unfortunately, the legislature finds it harder to abide by these principles. For example, during this session, they passed a $200 million tax increase on prescription drugs and tried to double the fees on driver's licenses, a $22 million fee hike I vetoed earlier this week. Today, Missouri's economy is growing. Businesses are hiring, and folks are getting back to work. But that does not relieve us of our obligation to maintain strict fiscal discipline. Fiscal responsibility is as important now as it was then, and that is why I'm taking the actions I'm taking today. The fiscal year 2014 budget passed by the General Assembly advances some worthy priorities. But on the most important issues affecting the fiscal health of our state, it badly misses the mark. Lawmakers failed once again to reform our state's largest tax credit programs, whose runaway costs far exceed their benefits to our economy and our communities. In fact, instead of reining in tax credit expenditures, lawmakers added to this already bloated system. I would also note that the General Assembly passed a number of bills that could add additional uncertainty to revenue collections, such as House Bill 128. The legislature also declined to draw down the federal dollars that Missourians have sent to Washington, to strengthen and improve health care in Missouri. Strengthening Medicaid would have given hundreds of thousands of working Missourians access to basic health coverage while generating additional revenue and savings for our state budget. Unfortunately, the consequences of their inaction are already being felt by Missouri families all across our state, as our health system constricts and premiums continue to rise. Missourians deserve better, and I'll do everything in my power to move this issue forward next session. This budget also creates a number of completely new programs and increases funds for others above and beyond my budget recommendations. All told, the legislature appropriated nearly $30 million more in additional spending than the budget I presented. Finally, this budget does not account for the cost of House Bill 253, which I vetoed earlier this month. With a price tag of at least $800 million annually, House Bill 253 would undermine our fiscal foundation now and for years to come. It's the equivalent of cutting all support for higher education, all of it, closing all of our prisons, or shutting down the entire Department of Mental Health. House Bill 253 is a dangerous experiment we simply cannot afford. These costs are real and immediate if my veto is not sustained. For example, special breaks for what's known as pass-through business income would begin to phase in this year. Another flawed provision would explode the bill's costs immediately if Washington passes the Federal Marketplace Fairness Act. Passage of this bill, already approved by the United States Senate with 69 votes, would reduce general revenue by an additional $1.2 billion in fiscal year 2014. As lawmakers begin to understand the problems with this bill and their immediate and continuing consequences, I'm confident they will come to the same conclusion I have. This bill should not become law. But no governor can responsibly manage a state budget on the assumption that a veto will be sustained. Here in Missouri, We don't balance budgets by making risky bets or taking leaps of faith. All these factors, the additional spending appropriated by the legislature, their failure to expand Medicaid and rein in tax credits, and the uncertainty created by House Bill 253 require that we take action now to ensure our state remains fiscally solvent later. That is why, after careful assessment, I am restricting $400 million from the fiscal year 2014 budget that I signed this morning. We've applied these restrictions broadly while making every effort to ensure they do not unnecessarily impact our most vulnerable Missourians or the vital services on which they depend. For example, while funds for adoptive families, early childhood education, and the Partnership for Hope are exempt, my office budget and those of these executive agencies are not. Additional funds for most capital improvements, rate increases for Medicaid providers, and pay raises for state employees will be restricted entirely, as will the many brand new programs added by employers. Instead of the record funding included in my budget proposal, the K-12 education formula will only receive level funding. A restriction of 4% will be applied to higher education. I've also instructed my budget director to develop a plan to eliminate another 1,000 full-time employees from the state workforce if necessary. Let me be clear. Restricting education funding is not how I think we should move our state forward. My balanced budget proposal included a $150 million increase for education for a reason. It's the best economic development tool there is. And that is why I will continue to work tirelessly to make sure that my veto is sustained so this education funding can be restored. But make no mistake, these restrictions represent only a fraction of what would be required if House Bill 253 becomes law. So the choice before us is stark and clear. Members of the General Assembly can either support House Bill 253 or they can support education, but they can't do both. Today, Missouri's perfect AAA credit rating is intact. Our unemployment rate has been below the national average for 45 straight months. And this year alone, we've seen global brands like Monsanto, Express Scripts, Boeing, and Ford announce major expansions that will create thousands of jobs across our state. In fact, just this week, General Motors announced an additional $133 million investment in Winsfield Platte, adding to the strength and jobs in that region. Progress like this doesn't happen by accident. By maintaining strict fiscal discipline and making responsible investments in our priorities, we will continue to move our state forward. Now, I'd be happy to take any questions that the press may have.